Now, like I said, I have a dream that one day Tanzania is going to become a place with a lot of Wi-Fi all over. Now, let me ask you a simple question. Do you guys know the movie known as The Matrix? How many of you have seen the movie, The Matrix? Hands or, hey, yeah. I need to hear voices. Okay, I see a couple of people have seen. Now, that's a movie that broke a lot of barriers when it comes to virtual reality. And today we're talking about smart cities, smart things, and virtual reality. Now, in the movie, there's a character known as Mr. Anderson. Now, he was one of the main characters. And today, we have a character. He's not in the movies, but he plays an integral part in entrepreneurship and a lot of things, especially when it comes to the finance, mula, chapa, mkwanja, or whatever language that we like to use. I'd like to invite Mr. Anderson from the World Bank to come and tell us what Dar es Salaam, or how Dar es Salaam stands in which position when it comes to smart cities. Mr. Anderson. Karibu sana.
Thank you. Good morning. So, Jumane, I looked up the numbers from YouTube. Let me just get it out for you. So, according to Google, it's almost 5 billion videos are watched on YouTube every single day. The most popular video is a song from Korea, South Korea, more than 2.4 billion views. That's almost half the people on the planet. That's, in terms of adults, that's a lot of people. So I want to talk to you about a few thoughts on smart cities, and I've been asked to say, where does Dar es Salaam stand? I work with the World Bank. I've been here 3 years, and I work both on technology and innovation and also on urban resilience. So my perspective is going to be partly on the tech, and partly on city government and city services and citizens. The first thing to point out a lot of people are aware of is the internet is changing faster and faster. It's not just about the amount of YouTube videos, it's the amount of how we interact. It used to be a mass publishing paradigm. A government would put up a website, they'd put a PDF of the driving license form, people download it. It's one-way information. And then you really had social media. And when I moved to Tanzania, I started coming here, people were really heavily getting into WhatsApp, Facebook, and it was two-way information. And what you're really seeing now is this paradigm of the Internet of Things. So an expectation that there'll be 50 billion connected devices by 2030. That's a prediction from Cisco. But there are more machines connected to the Internet than people now. That means that it's your phone talking to Dart's timetable for the next bus from the BRT, and if that bus is sharing its location, its GPS location, you can see when it's coming. So when we think about a smart city, if you Google it and click images, as I do all my research, you get this sort of instant impression of what the concept's all about. And the impression is of a sort of tech utopia. It's these planned, stylized, ideal cities that are efficient, clean, modern, technological. And if we think of real-world examples, we might think of places like Singapore, hyper-efficient city. Let me just go back one. Or Songdo, Korea, a planned city. Skip this one. Masdar in Abu Dhabi, this is a technological city. This has been designed for the latest technologies to be ultra-efficient, ultra-low carbon footprint, low water footprint. But I really want to focus on, I think, what does tech can do for cities that were not built yesterday, that don't have all of the resources that they aspire to have, that aren't perfectly planned. So this is Mexico City, 20+ million people, and it's largely informal and it's sprawl, right? And that's a little bit where Dar es Salaam stands. We can see that the story of human development, especially in the last century, is about urbanization primarily. More of us live in cities now than ever before. That growth really started in the 60s and 70s in Asia and Latin America, and you see the rise of the megacities. But if you look at Africa, it's catching up very, very fast, and that's really the key. It's the speed at which Africa is urbanizing, and Dar es Salaam is one of the fastest growing cities in Africa. So Dar es Salaam will be a megacity by 2030. The pace at which it becomes a megacity, the manner in which it is planned or not planned, is really at the crux of the challenge of, so how can tech help? This is really Dar es Salaam today, right? A lot of informality, 75%, somewhere between 70 and 80% informal, unplanned spaces and systems. Rapid growth, more than 5% per year. It's 40% of the GDP of Tanzania is in Dar es Salaam. So people are coming here for jobs, but those jobs aren't really as productive as they could be. They're not as easily accessible as they should be. The cost of moving around the city is not that low. So there's a lot of room for improvement. The benefits of urbanization, of densification, are not really optimized in a place like Dar es Salaam because the needs really exceed the available resources, right? It's growing faster than the city infrastructure can handle. And you see that in flooding, drainage, traffic jams, pollution, environmental degradation, et cetera, et cetera. So to come back, there's a lot of definitions of smart city, and most of them are brands. They're branded as a sort of concept for IBM or Cisco to sell you on technology platforms, or they're branded by management consultants to say this is going to be a really smart, intelligent way of doing things if you hire us. There's one standard that I like, which is used by cities, that isn't a brand, and it says that the smart city is the effective integration of physical, digital, and human systems in the built environment to deliver sustainable, prosperous, and inclusive future for its citizens. Right? It's the systems working together. Technology is enabling things to be done differently. So if you break that into an equation, as a techie, I kind of like equations. Technology and data, if you combine it with organizational change, will give you a sustainable, efficient, effective city. So that's really the key. And how do you do both those parts of the equation? The guiding principle says you have to have a vision. A smart city is a visionary city first. If you don't know where you want to go, you don't know what tech to pick, you don't know how to use it. It's got to be citizen-centric. Yes, it needs to be digital. Digital allows you to do things differently. The marginal cost of replication tends to zero, and that has some really interesting effects on the production model for apps and services and participation. But if you really want to harness that, you need to be open and collaborative. So there's kind of an inbuilt tension because there's this promise that the smart city is this technology thing that allows you to have real-time data. And there's an adage from the old ex-CEO of the UK government. He says that in the analog world, policy dictates delivery. You make a master plan, you build the master plan, 5 years later you evaluate. In the digital world, delivery dictates policy. You can have real-time feedback loops. You can iterate as you go along. You can also have really fine detail, high-resolution maps, high-resolution information. Now we can use cell phone data to see where commuters are moving from which neighborhood to which neighborhood. You can integrate all of this in dashboards, apps, analysis. So it has this promise that we can somehow manage this complexity, this informality of these 5.5 million people coming, working in Dar es Salaam, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's the other way around. It allows you to say, let's do things that's democratized, let's be bottom-up, let's participate differently. We can have app stores for city services, renew your driver's license, buy a BRT bus ticket. How do we enable that ecosystem to flourish without the command and control? So the active engagement of new stakeholders. All urban adults in Tanzania, certainly in Dar es Salaam, are digital citizens now. They all have a signal and they have a SIM card. So citizens can self-organize, whether it's WhatsApp or Facebook. That allows for new architectures of participation. So this is the example of the technology infrastructure, right? The branded, the IBM Smart City. It's a $100 million investment, actually, by Rio de Janeiro with IBM. And it's the command center. You have hundreds of flat panel TVs, and I love flat panel TVs. It looks like Space Command. And this is the center of the city looking at weather, traffic, rainfall, and it co-locates fire department, police department, water services, storm drainage, these kinds of functions. This is really good to help you respond quickly in an emergency, but it's a complete waste of money if you don't have the organizational change. If the city commissioner can see a storm alert coming and he wants to mobilize drains cleaning, but he needs to write a letter to the municipal waste collector and send it, all of these flat screens are not going to help you, right? So you need to not only just have quicker decisions, but change what questions you're asking when you have the data, when you have this technology. So my view is These are cool, and these can be helpful when you've done a lot of other things right, but it's not the starting point. Starting point is figuring out what is the critical data that exists that people have, and how do we use digital to make these decisions differently. So this is an example from Kibera from 2009 in Nairobi, an informal neighborhood. The government didn't really have any maps, any data of the city, but the citizens know if they have a giant pothole, if it's prone to leaks, if there's crime and violence, if there's street lighting or no street lighting. The city doesn't know. So it's a question of information access problem, right? And today you have collaboration tools that are simple, that are low cost. That's really the innovation, is the reduction in cost and complexity from the cell phone, from the GPS, from open source software. So the ability to digitize citizens' voices, put it on the map, and share it at very low marginal cost is part of beginning to have that integration of digital and physical systems. So that's where we talk about platforms like OpenStreetMap. Has everybody heard of OpenStreetMap? Maybe, mostly. Has everybody heard of Wikipedia? Great. So Wikipedia, you know, it overtook Encyclopedia Britannica within 4 years of being invented. It's the crowdsourcing example of the world. It's not that crowdsourcing is a new method. The Oxford English Dictionary was crowdsourced more than 100 years ago, believe it or not. What's new is that the marginal cost of extra users of that platform tends to zero. So there are millions and millions of editors in Wikipedia, and OpenStreetMap is the same. There's over 3 million OpenStreetMap editors. So if you're in Kibera and you have no resources and you want to digitize, you just need a phone, you need a digital signal, and you have 300 million volunteer editors working for you. That's really the power of these online platforms today, the scale that comes with a global commons. So similar things have been done in Dar es Salaam. I'm very grateful to the Commission for Science and Technology, Dr. Mashinda, who has supported from the beginning the project Ramani Huria, the open map. And it was really proving, can we begin to systematically build in these tools, leveraging of crowdsourcing platforms like OpenStreetMap, with urban planning students, with community members, with town governments, to begin to fill in the map in those informal areas where we don't have data, 75% of the city. And specifically, can we begin to find data that citizens have a comparative advantage to know that the government will always find expensive, difficult, or just inconvenient to collect? Like hyper-local information. Is the drain full of trash? Is there a big hole? So here you see the map being filled in Tandale. This was in 2011-12. The citizens were able to add information like public toilets, how much the toilet cost, is it private, what kinds of houses, the mosque, the church, etc. All sorts of really useful hyper-local context. Last night at around midnight, I looked up the Limani Convention Center and I compared it to Google. So I'm not saying it's better than Google in everywhere in the world, but there's different things in there. You may not be able to see, but the little green dots are trees. Someone has mapped all the trees in this neighborhood. I don't know how accurate it is, but you're not going to find that on Google, right? All the roof prints of the houses are on there. Swahili labels are on there. So you can make it what you want it to be if you have a vision. And you don't need permission and you don't need startup capital. You can go out and you can add information to this. And that's really the power of that bottom-up architecture of participation. One of the things you can add is ephemeral data. This is not the physical assets, but communities, temporary features. So this is a map of communities' perceptions of flooded areas or flood risk areas. Traditionally, a government would hire an expensive engineering firm that will do a hydraulic model, they get elevation data. It costs a lot of money. But here, you can ask citizens to tell you who gets frequently flooded, who got flooded in the last event, and you can turn that into a map, and you can turn that into actionable information. So these maps are far better than anything that the Tandale ward officer has ever had in terms of flood control. But this could equally be perceptions of safety, pollution, congestion, noise, you name it. And it doesn't have to be humans, it can be sensors or humans. So how can the city use this? This is an example from Boston, right? Boston has not as much flooding and not as much informality as Dar es Salaam, but it has one problem Dar es Salaam doesn't have: snowstorms, right? And in a snowstorm, the city has to do a lot of things quickly. One of the things it has to do, which it finds very difficult, is to clear out all of these red fire hydrants. This is the water for the fire department to connect to if there's a fire in a house. By law, they have to be clear. They have to be accessible. But it's also interesting for the citizen to make sure they're accessible, because if your house catches fire, you want the fire department to have access to water to put the fire out. So during a snowstorm, a small group of people in the city will find it very difficult to drive around and clear out 25,000 hydrants from snow. But 25,000 residents of the city could do one each relatively easily if there's a way to collaborate between the city and the citizens. So that's the idea of Adopt a Hydrant. It's a platform, it's an open source project, it's relatively simple. It allows a citizen to volunteer to register a hydrant and say, I will clean it out, here's my phone number, send me an SMS when it needs to be done, when it's snowing. I'll confirm it's done. If it hasn't been done, my neighbor who's interested in this can steal it from me and rename the hydrant. So the perk is I can name the hydrant Neo, or whatever I want to call my hydrant. And if I don't do it, my neighbor can come along and change the name. So cities are doing this kind of thing now more and more, where they're finding ways to allow citizens to participate, to do a maintenance task and get some kind of reward. Maybe it's recognition, maybe it's a tax break. So this is the vision for Dar es Salaam. It's one out of many things that can be done. Of course we don't have snowstorms, but we do have flooding. And we do have a problem with keeping the drains clean of waste in advance of the heavy rains. So those of you who have seen the raining in the last two or three months, a lot of trash is floating through the rivers. It's blocking many of the drains. How can we mobilize and direct cleaning campaigns to be more targeted to those critical choke points that are full of trash? Well, the city doesn't really know exactly where all the little drains are, especially in the informal areas, and it doesn't know exactly which ones are full of trash, but the residents do. They have a business, they have a house, and they have a vested interest to try and keep it clean, but maybe they need a little extra help, an incentive. Maybe they need someone to come and collect the trash once it's been cleaned out of the drains, if they can agree to organize it into collection centers. So this is where collaboration tech can really come in. So Tuam Taro is exactly that. It's trying to connect the meteorological agency, which is working on better hydromet data, better flood alerting systems, to be more predictive, more targeted in where the flooding is expected to be, and that's the top-down approach, to citizen data that can say, these are the choke points, these are the really critical drains, these are the ones we're cleaning out all the time, but we need a bit of help. We need someone to take away the rubbish when we clean the drain. That's just one vision. We're going to be launching this soon, soft launch in the next few months. I'm not sure when. So we do look forward to participation. We do look forward for startups to help us build out the platform, understand how it works. But ultimately, we hope that you as citizens may be using this in the next flood season. So I want to close just with a few thoughts also about tech. I mean, I spoke about digitization and the bottom-up and the top-down, but really, technology is very difficult to manage. There's this saying, it's called Amaras Law, that in the short run, we always overestimate technology, but in the long run, we underestimate it. So this is just simply a graph of these slightly random personal choice milestones in the last 10, 15 years. And you can see, maybe you can't read, but Wikipedia was born in 2001, and by 2004, it overtook Encyclopedia Britannica. Facebook was created in 2004, and then it reached 1 billion users by 2008. So the rise of the billion-user platforms. WhatsApp reached 1 billion users a month recently. So Facebook, the YouTube was 5 billion videos a day. That's incredible. It's really difficult to predict the winners. You shouldn't try to make your bet on winners. So how do you future-proof a city? I had in here, this slide is from last year, the Rwandan drone port, and I put it for somewhere in 2017. They already started launching services last year. So even trying to predict 1 year ahead, I'm wrong. Nevertheless, I'm going to take the risk, and I'll make a few predictions. One is Bitcoin and blockchain, right? The government of Georgia registered a blockchain for land tenure. So those of you who have heard of Bitcoin, everyone's heard of Bitcoin? The cryptocurrency, right? It uses an algorithm as a ledger to record transactions. It's used for currency, but that's really a slightly esoteric and random first application. A much better one would have been formal transactions, marriages, births, deaths, buying and selling your car, buying and selling your house, land title, things that are fundamental goods for a country or for a city. So the government of Georgia launched last year, and last month they recorded 100,000 land title exchanges on blockchain. That's really interesting, government adopting tech that has come out of somewhere completely different to the government ecosystem. Dubai is going to start launching taxi drone services in July from these Chinese drones called the EHang 186. Good luck. I mean, the future's cool, right? It's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be here sooner than you think. I put in a couple of other ones here. SpaceX, Elon Musk with Tesla, he wants to launch over 4,000 satellites to provide internet all over the world. So the future, we cannot imagine 10 years from now, really. I mean, I'm hesitating to project 2 or 3 years from now. Ethiopia is building its own satellite now for environmental monitoring. There's a real renaissance in the space industry for small satellites and for small companies to deliver digital services, whether it's connectivity or monitoring or surveillance or data. And it's part of this 50 billion connected devices world that we expect to see by 2020. So the closing thoughts on how to be a smart city, this goes back to that framework, guiding principles. You have to establish a compelling and inclusive vision for the city. Startups, citizens, and government need to work together to say where do they want to be in 5 years, 10 years. It's important to have a citizen-centric view of service design and delivery, right? If you build it and hope they'll come, how many tech companies have tried that? The first thing Startup School tells you is go and find your customers and minimum viable product, test, iterate, and cities should be the same. Complete an integration of digitization of spaces and systems. That means timetables, bus routes, houses, property numbers, addressing systems. Dar es Salaam doesn't have a functional addressing system. So this is going to be really important. There's a really important role for the government to put in together digital public goods. Location is one of them, of things and people and systems. But ultimately, you have to embed openness and sharing in the way the city works to future-proof, right? No one really knows whether the Chinese drone is going to take off figuratively as well as literally, or blockchain, or what's coming down the road. But increasingly, the innovation will come not from government, it'll come from you guys. No one can really pick the right winners yet, but if you have open standards, you're going to future-proof yourself. If you pick up a winner, a proprietary system, you'll be locked in. And there are too many examples of cities that have legacy infrastructure, legacy systems that are regretting it today. So I think Dar es Salaam has an opportunity to develop a vision, to be citizen-centric, to complete the digitization, and to embed openness. Thank you.